All right, so what I want to do next is I'm going to turn this example into kind of a template of sorts that you could reference when working on the homework or when working on your final project. And I had mentioned in a previous video that I think that for your final project, working with a Flexbox is probably going to be the easiest thing for you to do. And the reason for that is because you need to create a 2-column website, but you also need to have your navigation horizontal, which means that more than likely you're going to have the header going across the top, you're going to have the nav going across the top, and then you're going to have the footer going across the bottom. So the only thing that's really going to need to be in multiple columns is going to be the content inside of the main. So since you're working with content in more of a local area, there's not really a real big need for you to use a grid unless you have content that you want to have a lot of control over how you're going to structure how everything is laid out, sort of like you would with a table. So that's up for you to decide, and if you want to do that, you can. But if all you're doing is putting everything in kind of lining up over top of each other, there's really no reason to outline a grid where it just says the header goes all the way across the top, the nav goes all the way across the top, and then the main, you would basically have 2 sections inside of the main, and you could say that it's going to go from line 1 to line 2 and then 2 to 3, and you could kind of block things out that way. But I just don't see a lot of a need for doing that. I guess there is some things that you could do with the grid gap and being able to kind of control the gutter space between each of your areas. But I think you probably would benefit the most from using a Flexbox, because with a Flexbox, you can already do quite a bit to make it responsive even before using the media queries, because you can basically have your sections inside of a main, and then you can have it where if there's not enough room for everything, it just goes on to the next line. So that would probably be my biggest recommendation. And then if you wanted to, you could go back to chapter 7 with the float as an option, and that's what the 4th edition of the book used to recommend before Flexbox and grid layout really got full recommendation status from the W3C. But it's a lot harder to work with. I think floats work a lot better if you are trying to work with a picture directly next to text and deal with word wrap and being able to wrap text around an image. As far as doing a whole layout with it, I don't think it works quite as well. Anyway, so let me give you kind of an example of what you could do. So I'll start here with the HTML, and I'll just kind of create a basic template. Oh wait, we want to have our navigation in an unordered list. I want to make this sort of generic where it's going to be like link 2, link 3. Now for your final project, you're going to be required to have more pages than this, but you'll be able to get the same idea no matter what. Okay, so then we're going to create a main. So our main, that is going to be our container. Just kind of a heads up on that. And then we can still leave this footer stuff in here. That should be fine. Now for your final, you're also going to be required to have your navigation again in the bottom. And the idea there is that with with a mobile website, it can be really difficult to scroll all the way back up to the top, and a lot of times you don't want to have to do that to go to the next page. So if you have the links in the in the footer, it just gives you another way that you can find that. Another solution to that would be setting your navigation so it is a fixed position. But for the final, you need to have it in 2 places. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Now the nav can exist in multiple places and it would be fine. This is kind of like copyright information. I'm going to put this underneath. And what you could do to differentiate these is you could basically call this, you could just call this the nav, and then you could basically, like, as you are adding styles in the styles section, you could have styles for, okay, let me think about where I want to put it. Probably here. So you could have your nav styles, and then you could have your footer nav styles, and you could just say, okay, well, in this case for the footer nav UL, I want the styles. For the footer nav LI, I want these styles. So you don't have to have them styled the same. And then same thing with the nav. You could do the nav UL, the nav list items, and the nav anchor link. So you've got all of the same options. You're just going to have to add a little bit of detail, and if you think it looks fine to have it be the same, you can keep it the same. Okay, so our main, I'm going to add a comment here. The main is our Flexbox container. I'm going to remove this paragraph. Okay, so what I would recommend is you think about all of your content and you think about how you would want to divide it into horizontal sections. And that's why I had that resource for this, the right way to structure HTML pages. So you can think for yourself, and it depends on the page. Like if you don't have a lot of content, you're just going to use one section. But if you have enough that you have to scroll a little bit, you might want to break it down into multiple sections. So you do want to use the section if you can, and it's kind of up to you. Well, you could do 2 divs, and you could have the sections inside of the div. You can have multiple sections and then have divs inside of it. It's kind of up to you. I'm going to do it like this. So I'm going to have a section. And in this case, so sorry, I'm already making this confusing. If you have multiple sections, if you have multiple sections, the section is then your flexible container. If you have just the individual items, then that will be your container. So let's start here with just 3 sections. This will be kind of like your homework. And I'm going to do a paragraph, and let's just grab some lorem ipsum. I'm getting this from that lipsum.com website. And actually, you know what? Probably the easiest thing to do would be for me to just grab the section with the paragraph and then duplicate that. All right, so the main right now for this example, that is our flexible box container. The sections are our items. The paragraph happens to be an item. So I can make a note here too. The sections are our items. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And now I'm going to go over to the styles. And you can see that it's really not happy with all of these styles that I'm adding, that I'm not putting any values in. So you'd want to try to avoid that if you can. One of the things that your homework is going to have you do is for the mobile section, you're going to have your links, and it kind of depends. You could have your mobile links like stack on top of each other. You could have them kind of just like fill in next to each other on the top. It kind of depends. Since we don't have too many links, you might want to have them all on the top. So what we could do, I'm trying to think. Let me double check what it looks like in the homework. All right, so since your homework shows your links stacking over top of each other, I'm going to give you kind of a brief idea of how you can work with that. And let me double check how I said it. So the way that your homework is going to have you deal with the nav is it's going to use the browser's default of display set to block. And it's basically just going to add a border underline underneath of it. In order to kind of symbolize that though, what we might do is we might go ahead and choose that we want we'll just write display block, but that's going to be applied by default by the browser anyway, so you don't necessarily have to include that, but it's basically going to say they're going to just stack over top of each other. And then what you would want to do then is do like display, or sorry, with the li we want to remove the list style type, none, and then we want to remove text decoration, none, so there's no underline. And then it's kind of up to you if you want to do anything else with it, but we'll leave it for now. And then what we're going to do with either tablet or mobile is we would say, okay, well, we want the nav UL now to have display set to flex. And then it's up to you. How do you want it to flex? Do you want it to have, let's do flex flow, because then we can say, well, I think I want it to be a row, and probably we want it to wrap around if there's not room for it. And then we could do justify content. That's kind of up to you. This could be where you could do like flex end, might look nice. Let's try flex end. If you didn't like that, you could also do like center, or you could do space around, might look nice, because that gives just like, will like kind of space things out from side to side. And I'm sorry if you can hear the lawnmower outside. So let me save that. Okay, so it doesn't look like a whole lot right now. Well, aside from this red is really hard to read. It's kind of distracting, but we've got the links are over top of each other. And in order to make it look more like the homework, you would just need to center it and make it a bit larger, add a little bit of space, padding or margin between each of these different items. So that way it kind of looks nicer and it looks more like a button. Here, this is allowing it to kind of align to the right. And you know what might actually look nicer, and what we could do is I'm going to copy, or I'm going to cut this. I'm going to move this to the desktop because I think that looks a little better for desktop. And then I'm going to keep it flex for tablet and have the row and wrap as well. But I think for this, I'm going to do center. So I think that'll look a little nicer. And then you can see we probably need to have some padding. That looks pretty bad. So anything that you would want to universally be applied to everything, you could just put in the mobile. Or if you only want it to, like, it doesn't necessarily need to be applied. We could go ahead and apply it though here. Let's do like padding. I'll do 10 pixels for starters, because I think it will help a lot in desktop and tablet, but I also think it could help a little bit here too. And you can see it's applying a little bit better to the sides than the tops. All right, so that's working with your navigation at least. And you can see that both of the navs are acting the same way. And so you might decide, okay, well, I want it to be on the right for this top one, but then maybe for the bottom one, you just want it to, maybe even want it to just be a list the whole time. So what you could do is you could go and take these same styles and just figure out what you would want them to be. Just for the sake of changing things up, I'm going to do inline. I'm going to still put that as none. Oh wait, I got these on the wrong line. This one will go here. This one will go here. I was just thinking for the footer, I might not necessarily mind, because usually footers have kind of more simplified looking links, but we can do the same thing. Text decoration, none. Whoops, none. Save that, refresh. So then I also am going to need to copy this to these as well, so that way the navigation doesn't accidentally overwrite it. Let's see. All right, so for this footer, it is not wanting to use the NavUL display inline. And this is where sometimes the way that you have things, there's multiple ways that you can do it, and it just kind of depends on the combination of how you're doing it. So in this particular case, it is not liking having the display inline. All right, so I had to change things around a little bit to kind of get the links the way that I wanted. So what I ultimately did was I removed the NavUL because we didn't really need it, and I could probably remove this as well so we have less to look at. So on the mobile, what I ended up with was footer nav with list style type none, and then display inline. I found that the best place for having the inline was directly on the LI, so it was applying directly to them as they would list next to each other. And then I've got the text decoration none. And then I also did the same thing in the tablet and desktop sections. I might not actually need to have these. Let me just see if I can delete them since they're duplicates. All right, so that's just keeping them in line no matter what. And then we could figure out what else we might want to do with them, because it's still moving over since I haven't specified that I don't want it to change the location. You'd have to figure out more things that you might want to do with it. So that's going to kind of be up to you on what you want to do. Let me think of what else we want to do. Okay, so back to the Flexbox. We've got these sections. And again, by default, whoops, I meant to grab this one. By default, we want the sections to stack over top of each other when it's mobile. That's the best thing, is just have everything be single column. So our main is our container. So somewhere between nav and footer nav, we could create a main. And for this one, we're going to say display block. By default, we just want it to stack over top of each other. Now, if you want to use some of the benefits of working with a Flexbox and being able to change the spacing and all of that, you could very well do that instead. You would just change it so that way the direction is a column, and then you wouldn't need the wrap. You could just do no wrap on it, or you could just have main display block. And then when you want it to start filling in next to each other, and that's kind of up to you if you want to do it tablet or if you also wanted to start doing that on the desktop. I would probably say it would make sense to do it in the tablet. So I would just say, I want the main to display as flex. And then you just have to think about what else you want it to do. So I'm going to do flex, flow, and I'm going to say, in this case, I kind of want it to be like the homework where it's going to be in multiple sections. So I'm going to say, I want it to be in a row, and I want it to also wrap. So that way if there's not room for everything. And then, again, it's kind of up to you if you want it to be like centered, if you want it to have like space around, I think looks nice. So I'll just do that. All right, so that's going to deal with the Flexbox. Now we've got an issue because right now the content is taking up the whole space. So what we could do is in the mobile section, I'm going to do section, let's do with like 90%. And then I'm going to do margin auto, just so that way it's not too close to the edge. I'm not a real fan of things getting too close to the edge because it just makes it really hard to click on and be able to see. And in fact, I think you can see like this looks a lot better than this text number. So everything you would probably want to bring in a little bit on the sides, but that's just going to kind of center it and make it look a little nicer. And then what we can do for this section where we actually want things to not fill up the whole space, let's do section. We've got 3 of them. Let's do like, whoops, getting ahead of myself. Width, let's do like 30%. So that's looking a little better. And you could also go in and we don't have any box sizing on this. But you can see we basically are saying, okay, well, when it's this size, we want it to be 30%. What you could also do is you could even say, I want it to be 3 columns. When it gets to tablet, maybe you want it to split into 2 columns. So maybe you could say, and what I could do here is I could take this section, move it down. I'm even starting to get a look. This is where it's really handy to have things tabbed because I want to make sure that these are all ending. Like this one confuses me a little bit because it's close to the edge. So I'm going to move that over so it doesn't get confused with. Oh, and I accidentally deleted my curly bracket for this one. All right, so I was going to say move that, and then here add in section and do something more like 50%. So then we've got these are 30%, these are 50%. It's not looking as good, but it kind of gives across that idea. Maybe I'll do 45 for now. So you have 3 columns, breaks down into 2 columns, and this is where like maybe centering doesn't work. Maybe you would prefer if you use like flex start, so then this bottom one would line up with the top one, and maybe that would kind of work a little bit better for what you want. Let's do that real quick. And you could even change that, like maybe you want it on the desktop version to do space around. And then you would just need to add your different styles. So I could take main, copy this, bring it down to the desktop section. Here, okay, so desktop, maybe I want to have space around, and then for our tablet styles, maybe this one I want to say, actually I want this one to have flex start. All right, so this is working with our 3 columns, down to 2, down to 1. You only need to do 2, so you wouldn't have to worry about this. And yours will fit a lot better because you also need to do the wrapper again and add margins. So by the time you add all of that, I think 2 columns will work really well with the sides that you're going to have. But this would probably be the easiest way to work with this. And then something else you can do, and this is where things are going to kind of complicate a little bit more, because right now your flex container is the main and your sections are your items. Now, I kind of want to do another one. So if this gets to, like if you're following along and you're creating your own file, you might want to save a copy so that way you don't lose the last version. But I'm going to remove this. And this time, your sections are going to be your container. So I'm going to say section is a Flexbox container, and then inside of the section, let's see, I want to create another grouping. So I'm going to create a div, and then inside of it I'm going to grab this paragraph. And let me think about this. Let me, let's see, I've got the div, I'll just copy the paragraph again. Okay, and then all right, so we've got the section is our container. We've got 2 groupings. Each one has a paragraph in it. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the div. Like in this case, you could just remove the divs and you could have the paragraph. The paragraph could be the item directly, or same thing, you could have like an image in there and it could behave that way. I'm just trying to make it a little easier to see how there's these groups, and this way too you can make it a little more complex. Like you could have a heading inside of here as well. Let's do that. Let's do an H2, I'll say heading, so that way you can kind of picture these a little bit more as like these little subgroups. And then what I would do here is we would have these sections, and then let me go ahead and save that. Same thing if you're wanting to use this, make a copy of this, and then instead of this section, we create a div, or in this case, you probably would want to make sure that you create a class that's being applied to those divs. So maybe we want to call this our, oh wait, where were we? We can call this our class equals, you can just say like column or something, or maybe like column group, or whatever you think makes sense. So we've got our column groups. You could even add in a class to these sections if you wanted to. If you want to say these are your rows, so you've got your columns and your rows, so you can keep track of them. So I'm going to save that, and so I'm going to switch this. So this width is going to have column group. Oh, and I need the period in front of it because it's class. And then I'm going to switch this so it says section. So anywhere that had main, I'm going to change to say section. Anywhere that said section, I'm going to change that so it says column group. I think I caught, nope, I need to do these two. Okay, so section. All right, let me save that. Okay, so this is working okay. I mean, it's still a little awkward, but now what I want to do, now that I have that, is I want to duplicate this section. So I'm going to copy it, and let me just paste it 3 times. So now what we're going to have is we're going to have 3 sections, and each one of them has 2 columns in it. So, and sorry that this has the same text in it. I'd really like it, and maybe we could actually change the text so it's a little easier to keep track of. I was a little, I'm gonna. All right, so what I did was I changed the paragraph. So the first one says 1, second says 2, third says 3, fourth says 4, fifth says 5, and then sixth says 6. So I know it's going to be small, but this will kind of help get a better idea of it. So let me go into our styles and try to make this a little bit easier to read. Oh. Okay, so I think that'll make it a little bit better. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you could put whatever content you wanted in it. And then as it resizes to tablet, and it looks like here we'd want to tweak this a little bit in the tablet. So we've got a little bit more room, maybe more like 40%. Oh, it's because it's flex start. Let's change that to justify content, or sorry, not justify, space around. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's going in that same order. And then what's happening here is now it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those sections are still stacking. So 1 and 2 are still in a section together. 3 and 4 are still in a section together. 5 and 6 are still in a section together, but it's allowing them to kind of behave however you want them to when it's in the tablet and the desktop version. So you can kind of control how kind of these subgroupings work together. Now, if it doesn't really matter and it's all part of the same content, you could just put it in one big grouping and you could apply it to the main. And then you could just have everything sort of do just that row and wrap where it'll just kind of continually wrap. But if you really want to make sure that you control what order these go in, that would probably be the best way to do it. So this is going to be the kind of key things that I would really recommend that you think about when you're working on your final project, and you can use that idea of either having the main be a flex box, or you can have these horizontal sections be flex boxes, and then depending on what's inside of it, those would be your items, and you can kind of control how they're going to behave. And that would probably be the easiest way to handle it. And then it's just a matter of working with your media queries and having it so by default they stack on top of each other if they're mobile, and then the Flexbox kicks in when it gets to tablet or desktop, depending on how quickly you want that to switch over. And then the same thing with the navigation. You can have your navigation start where it's just the default display stacking on top of each other, and then you could use inline, or you could use the Flexbox if you want to take advantage of the Flexbox and how you can play around with the spacing and everything. And you could use that to kind of switch how your navigation is going to be behave as the desktop version. And those are going to be the key things to look at. And I don't want you to feel like you have to use Flexbox. You can use the float as an option too. You can go back to the video that talks about that. And if you really want to, you could also use grid. But I think that you could probably see by now, just based off of how this kind of template is, based on how this template is kind of being organized, you basically have your header, your nav going all the way across, your footer going all the way across. It doesn't necessarily need to really be in a grid. If you were to, you would basically just have a column on the left as grid and column right as a grid, and then you would have to kind of split up your content this way. I think the Flexbox is going to give you a lot more flexibility in how you handle things. All right, so this is going to be everything for working with media queries and just kind of making things responsive and mobile friendly in general. If you've got any questions, you can comment in the discussion, or you can send me an email.